Welcome. This presentation on election integrity is brought to you by Focus on America, dedicated to the hundreds of American patriots who sacrificed in generating the data provided herein. A special thanks goes to Mike Lindell for his self-sacrifice. Production by Andiamo Studios.
Do you swear to tell the truth or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Voting systems are, by design, meant to be used as closed systems that are not networked, meaning they are not connected to the internet.
Colorado is considered one, if not the safest state in the nation to cast a ballot. None of our voting equipment is connected to the internet.
So, as Secretary Griswold pointed out, voting machines are not connected to the internet for a reason.
On election day in a precinct, are your machines hooked up to the internet?
No, not by any stretch. We go through a number of certifications, government certifications, and the first one is at a federal level. So those standards mandate that election systems, such as ours, are designed to work in a closed system, air-gapped, no internet.
Why would you want to get rid of the machine?
Nobody trusts them.
They're tied to the internet, and they were hacked.
Well, ma'am, they're not tied to the internet.
Yes,
they are.
They're not.
They are.
What is the vehicle for the transmission from the ICP? Is it cellular modem versus VPN?
It is a cellular modem that can be configured in a VPN.
Right?
Well, ma'am, they're not tied to the internet.
Yes, they are.
They're not.
They are.
Currently in Chicago-Cook County, we work with Verizon to secure that network.
What wireless chipset / modem does the hardware have?
We support a variety.
Well, ma'am, they're not tied to the internet.
Yes, they are.
They're not.
They are.
When people talk about certain things.
Election integrity, presentation number 1. We all know about problems across our nation. What about Alabama? Presentation by George Barry and Bob Rext. The purpose of this briefing is to, number 1, expose the cheating in the election process. Number 2, present the only option for election integrity. The agenda will be the machines and registration, forensics, how it's done, the cost and solution, and fighting back. First of all, machines and registration. All across the United States, there are basically 2 types of election voting machines. 27 states use Dominion voting machines, and 23 states uses machines by ES&S. The configurations of each are a little bit different. Many use paper scanners and electronic tabulators. Some use all electronics with an electronic laptop and a tabulator. Alabama uses the ES&S machines. Now, ES&S in Alabama. Alabama's Secretary of State contracts with electronic systems and software called ES&S. Many counties use ES&S to maintain their voter rolls as well. County workers must first log in to the ES&S website each morning. ES&S provides the paper ballots. ES&S programs the tabulators for each and every election. We, the people, though, cannot see the source codes used. ES&S performs the IV&V testing of their own machines. Now, what is IV&V? We're from Alabama. Specifically, we're from Madison County, where Redstone Arsenal is. When the military contracts with, let's say, a Boeing, General Dynamics, Grumman, that they will give a contract to the prime contractor, but a secondary IV&V is assigned to the contract to make sure that the contract is performed. Now, the reason for this is to make sure everything is above board and everything acts. Now, our country is based upon a system of checks and balance. What it reminds me is that our founding fathers gave us a reason for checks and balance. In fact, John Adams said it is by balancing each of these powers against the other two that efforts of human nature towards tyranny can alone be checked and restrained, and any degree of freedom preserves in the Constitution. Sam Adams also said, but let every citizen remember at the moment of his offering his vote that he is executing one of the most solemn trusts in American society, in which he is accountable to God and our country. Our founding fathers wanted to make sure that we have a check and balance on everything we do. In the voting process, that EMV is not performed. Also, ES&S and Clarity Cital provide the software to each county laptop to access and produce the tabulating results. Now, the first step in voting, and I think everyone here who has actually voted and does vote remembers the day that they registered. On your screen is a sample of the Alabama registration program. The Board of Registers office is where you go to turn these in. The form here, you get your name, your address, and at the very bottom it says here is a question to every those registering, is that I am a U.S. citizen, live in the state of Alabama, and I solemnly swear to approve, to support, and defend the Constitution. This form is to be filled out by the individual and signed. There have been, number one, here's one of the problems. There have been in the state of Alabama examples where people will come in and drop numbers of registration forms off, but the registrar's office is never assured to know that that person who filled out the form was the person who filled it out. It could have been filled out by someone else. No proof of citizenship is required. Let's look at Michigan. Local Michigan police and the state attorney general discovered there's a high rate of fraudulent voters in their state. They received this information and they actually turned it over to the FBI. This is dated in August 30th of 2023. A city clerk's office said that a woman had come in and dropped off a stack of voter registrations. Now, I mean, not just 1, 2, or 10, but a stack of voter registrations. And the police interviewed the woman to find out what happened here, what's going on. This one was called Suspect 1. In the police report, that she explained that she was paid $1,150 a week to do these services, and she lived in a motel, and the rented vehicle was provided for. Now, the Open Secret website states that in a nonpartisan research group that was tracking the money, the U.S. policy provided the data showing that GBI has been paid millions of dollars over the 2020 election cycle, but is also played in Alabama, was also paid millions of dollars by our own Alabama Doug Jones. These groups include the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, also which gave over $2 million, the Democratic National Committee Services, which gave over $1 million, and the Biden for President Committee paid GBI $450,000. Now let's look at the forensics. I'd like to turn this over to Bob Retz, and he will go into the details here.
Thank you, George. I'm going to talk about forensics of the election here. I want you to imagine for a second that a crime has been committed, let's say a murder, but instead of a dead body that you see, it's been our election process that has been taken care of. Now, we don't have any smoking gun. We don't have a person that has admitted to this crime, but we do have a bunch of evidence laying around. And what I'm going to show you is evidence from this crime scene. So I'm going to be taking you through an awful lot of data, so bear with me here. Let's talk about the voter rolls as a start. Now, this is a graph from Dr. Douglas Frank. He provided a lot of information both to Mike Lindell and to his website that I've drawn a lot of this information. On the graph on the left-hand side is a list of the population of voters, and then across the bottom is a list of the registered voters. As you move from the left to the right, you have more registered voters. Now, as you move up the vertical axis, you have a situation where you turn into more inflated voter turnout. And the same thing down on the bottom is that you have more of a dirty rolls as you move to the right. So where is Alabama? It's in this section here on the upper right-hand side, as you can see, in inflated voter rolls and inflated turnout. We have a lot of good company with us. For instance, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and other corrupt states. So we are not perfect in this situation. Now, Dr. Frank was invited to Wisconsin and was given database concerning their registrations. And he did a study of 3 counties, and you can see them listed there. What he noticed was that there were 3 spikes, and they correspond to the 3 elections, 2012, 2016, and the 2020 election. Now you notice that there is a big, huge spike in each one of these, as you can see here, here, and here. And what happened was, after each election, after the spike, there was a big dump in the registered voters, and you can see those dumps. Specifically, I want to call your attention to the 2016 election, where they lost 25% of their registered voters. Now, any person with common sense would say, did I lose 25% of my population in that county? Obviously, no. The other thing I want to point out too is after the 2016, there was a gradual add back into the registered voters in preparation for the 2020 election. Now, this does not happen, and it's not normal to fluctuate like this. So when Dr. Frank presented this to the Wisconsin House of Representatives, he was speaking specifically to the Speaker of the House. His reply to Dr. Frank was, hey, well, you picked up the 3 most popular counties. This is just an anomaly. Dr. Frank kind of laughed and says, well, I studied all of your counties of Wisconsin, and you can see that it happens everywhere with the same spikes. And this doesn't happen in Wisconsin. Dr. Frank found that this happened throughout the United States. He analyzed 46 of the 50 states and found the same thing. Now, you ask, why do they do this? Well, it's used for what is termed by Mike Lindell is a voter line of credit. If you were going to, it's no different than when you go to the bank and you want to borrow some money, you can take out a line of credit and they give you a line of credit. You can spend money as you wish. Well, instead of dollars, they're using voters, and they use the excess voters in these voter rolls to manipulate through algorithms on the machines. They have collateral that they can draw from, fake voters that they can manipulate the outcome of any election. So getting back to Alabama from Wisconsin, we have Alabama, where they ranked. Well, you notice that it was up in the upper right-hand corner of the graph. It was 97%. What else do we know about Alabama? We find out that there are 4,600 registered voters older than 110 years old. Interesting enough, a person asked our Secretary of State, our ex-Secretary of State, John Merrill, said, why is this so? And he said, as a reply, we have a lot of people that live long lives here in Alabama. It is kind of irritating that he would put somebody down like that. Another thing that I found out in looking at Dr. Frank's information, where he showed all of the counties in Alabama, 21 of the 67 counties had more registered voters than citizens. Again, this is not normal. That means that there is some cheating going on. Now, here's a graph. It's a little complicated, so I'm going to try to take you through this at a slow pace. You'll notice this blue line along the top in here, and it's buried amongst some other lines, but that represents the county of Madison. It's based on the 2020 census. And you can notice that there's 2 humps here, one for the millennials and one around age 60 for the baby boomers. Now, the other thing too I want to show is that the black line represents active active registrations. And a couple things I want to point out here. It's not too important, but it does make you wonder where the black line exceeds the number of registered voters in those age groups exceeds the number of people living in that particular county. Now, when Dr. Frank looked at not only Alabama, but 17 or 18 other states when he got the data, he was able to find out that there was an algorithm that was used, very common in statistics, where they take there's a direct relationship of the registered voters to the recorded ballots. And for Alabama, and the other states vary with percentages, but for Alabama, the key is 64%. And when he looked at that and he discovered the key, he was able to predict how many people voted in those particular age groups. And you see that represented by this blue line here. Now, the interesting thing that comes up is that when you compare Dr. Frank's prediction with the actual ballots that were recorded along here, you notice that the lines pretty much coincide. Very unusual. In the land of statisticians, they can't say that two graphs correlate or they don't correlate. They have to come up with a value. And they came up with what's called a correlation coefficient. If you have a correlation coefficient of 1, that means it's a perfect match. A correlation coefficient of 0 means that there's no match at all. By the way, a -1 means that it's completely separate. Now, the thing here is that in Madison County, the correlation coefficient is 0.995. That is virtually impossible. And when you look at all 67 counties in Alabama, the correlation coefficient ranges from 0.93 to 0.999. Again, it is not natural. This is a man-made correlation. Now, I want to point out one more thing with this graph, is you'll notice this hump right here. This bump appears in each and every county. Again, it does not occur naturally. This means that these curves were man-made. The ballots recorded were created by a machine. Now, let's talk about the voting process. Being an engineer, I wanted to be able to examine and simplify my understanding of what happens when you go from registration through the voting process and you end up with the results at the end of the night that you turn into the TV or radio or the websites to find out Now, what you're going to see, because we live in Madison County, I did research on Madison County, and this is what we call a process flow diagram, and I'm going to take you through this. Starting in the upper left-hand side, this is where George talked about the voter registration. When you go to your precinct and you check in, they check your identification, make sure, hey, it's Bob Retch, here is your ballot. They give you a ballot and a paper. You mark your ballot, excuse me, and you walk over to an ES&S tabulator. ES&S is what's used in Alabama. You feed your ballot into the tabulator. At that point, your paper ballot gets converted to ones and zeros, and it gets computerized. This machine produces 3 products. One, your ballot that goes into the bottom is taken out later on and then taken by the sheriff with all the other ballots in the county and is put into a cell in the Madison County Jail. It's locked up and you can't get to it unless 2 things happen. One, there's a contested election, less than 1% between the 2 top winners, forces a hand count. The other one is that you have to get a court order. These ballots never essentially see the light of day once you put it into the machine. 2 other products come out of this. One is a printout at the end of the day, and the thumb drive that is installed in the machine they take out at the end of the day, and they make sure that the numbers correlate. They put it in sealed envelopes, they sign it, and it's taken by the inspector of the precinct or the sheriff's deputy to the county courthouse. When it gets there, one or two people take this information, the printouts and the thumb drives. They take the thumb drive and load it into a Madison County laptop. After a while, when they have several precincts report, they call it a batch, and they take the batch and they transfer the data from that batch, several precincts, and they load it onto another thumb drive, which is inserted into the Secretary of State issued laptop. Now, the interesting thing here is that this laptop has software loaded on it. It was by the company called Clarity and Cytal. That company was created in Barcelona, Spain, and then eventually went bankrupt. They were bought out by a group called the Paragon Group, and they have servers currently in 35 countries, including Russia. Now, you want to stop and ask yourself, why is Clarity and Cytal in Alabama when they have servers and companies all across the world, and we all know how things can be cheated when you're dealing with computers. But we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. Once that data is uploaded onto the laptop, Clarity and Cytal process that data, and then they send it out to two locations. One, they send it to the Secretary of State, and the second one is they send it to another company called Edison. Edison is located in New Jersey, and it is the sole provider for all states and all information pertaining to voters. Everything funnels through one company in New Jersey. From there, that is fed to the news organizations, the websites. It's fed to CNN, MSNBC, it's radios, newspapers, AP, or whatever. Everybody gets that from one location. So you ask yourself, Bob, what's wrong with this? Well, George already talked about the voter rolls here, but there's other things wrong. I mentioned the public access. We can't see our paper ballots. These machines are easily hacked through the internet. They have wireless cards in them. There is an ES&S source code that cannot be seen by anybody except ES&S. No independent validation and verification companies can go in and look at that data. And then also all of the components in these machines are communist Chinese products. They all come from China, which means that who knows what's on the hardware, software, or any embedded firmware. Another one is a possibility of open and hacking through the internet. And then I didn't mention that the thumb drives, when they're done from the county courthouse, within 7 days have to be turned back into ES&S. They go back to Nebraska, and all of the evidence and data on the thumb drives are wiped clean. They're gone, so we can't see those again. All in all, there are 14 opportunities for voter fraud in this process that you've seen. Now, here it is again, and I want you to look at the curtain. Once you put your ballots into the machine, it gets converted to ones and zeros, and you do not see anything, and you do not see any of the processes behind there. You are forbidden until it gets spit out about 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and you find out the winner is. I call this a curtain of secrecy. But even though we're not permitted to see what's behind the curtain, you have to trust us. Everything is good. Don't worry about it. The machines aren't connected to the internet. All right, moving on to the county laptops. The one you saw at the previous slide that shows the county issued laptop, it's a Dell laptop, and they're purchased by the Secretary of State. And you notice they're in Crenshaw County through the testimony during a court hearing that was by Focus on America suing the Secretary of State. They obtained the purchase order for a hardened laptop, as our Secretary of State, John Merrill, tells us. They're not connected to the internet. Everything is okay. Don't worry about it. But when you look at this purchase order, you see a blue highlighted line here, and if you blow it up, what does it say? It says a Wi-Fi card and Bluetooth capability. Now, if the machines aren't connected to the internet, why do they have this information on a requirement for the purchase of that particular laptop? During a public tabulator demo in Lee County a person took some copied ballots and scissor trimmed them and fed them into an ES&S tabulator, and unfortunately, they accepted it. The thing is, John Merrill was telling us that only special paper can be read by the tabulators. After this happened, John Merrill sent a memo out to all probate judges and told them not to let this happen.
They don't know what they're doing, and I hate they're doing it the way they're doing it. But that's not the way we're doing it, which is why we are the gold standard for election administration. And that's not just something that I say.
Ready? Lawsuit, because taking it to an independent testing authority is very expensive. So
It
why
did it.
don't we jeopardize our business?
It just counted it. Okay, this is copied. Is this our two? Yeah. It's-
And the other original printer cable had 3 cables. So the red, white, and the original printer cable had 3 cables. So the red, white, and the red.
It's counting them all.
So in other words, you can make
You can make
500
copies.
copies
Yes.
of one ballot
Yes.
and send them through.
Just send them through.
Send them
So
Yep.
this is why we need to be watching
Yes.
to make sure that they're only putting one ballot through.
Have you gotten your letters?
Feeding, are you just recording? Thank you.
So that's why we do all of this.
Just to feeding
So
it through.
something
All
wasn't
these copies.
wrong. Because it never,
All of these are copied ballots.
And put in there on a particular type of paper that is provided by the printer that we use.
And it's not even the same.
It's not even the same
thickness.
cardstock.
Yeah, the thickness is just regular Xerox paper, nothing fancy.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought I heard you say special paper when you began talking.
I don't really know what you're talking about.
So moving on, Clay Parikh, one of our local experts here, was in Minnesota working on some tabulators up there, and he found on a flash drive this script. And if you notice that it is not written in English, we verified that this is Chinese language. This is what was on a tabulator's flash drive. You can't see the source code, but you have to trust us. Now, back to Dr. Frank again. He was able to get the cast vote records. Very few states had really given up this information, but he got the cast vote records from Rhode Island. And if you look at the bottom, that graph represents the actual votes as they happened in the state of Rhode Island with regards to time. And you'll notice that Trump, in red, was trailing behind Biden all along, and it was obvious that Joe Biden would win the state of Rhode Island. When you look at the graph on the top, you'll notice that what was reported in the news media said it was a horse race all along until very late in the evening. It was neck and neck. Look at the difference between the two reports there. Besides cheating, why would the media do something like this? And the answer is that they make money. They keep you glued to your TV sets and sell you a bunch of advertisements until the very end, or we go to bed, and then they reveal the winner, and voila, Joe Biden wins. And look at the big spike in the upper right-hand side. So you got to ask yourself, if they lied to us about global warming, and they lied to us about the pandemic, they lied to us about vaccines and masks, they also lied to us about electric vehicles. Why not would they lie to us about the elections? Now, I was very interested in the 2022 Alabama runoff. I think it was in June. And I looked at the results from 4 different elections in our state. A federal Senate, a federal House election, a statewide election, Secretary of State, and a local state house there. And if you look at the numbers on the right-hand side of the final tallies, you'll notice that all of the losers won by around 36.3%. Look at the difference in the scatter of these numbers, which is very small. Very unusual, and you have to think to yourself, hey, is there an algorithm at play here? This is not natural. Another example, again, during the November general election in 2022, I was very interested in the Alabama governor's race because I wanted to look and see how many people voted for Dean Odle, who was a write-in candidate. So I had at home, I had two screens on my computer. On the left-hand screen, I had CNN called up, and on the right-hand side, I had the Alabama Secretary of State's website called up to monitor the elections. I noticed something, and I picked up my camera and took these pictures. The first one from CNN was at 7:56, and you can see Kay Ivey had 5,033 votes. 3 minutes later, if you look at the Secretary of State's website, I took this picture, they're reporting 3,140 votes. Why is there a difference? Why is the information going from the state of Alabama faster to Seidel and to Edison and then to the news organizations faster than that goes to the Secretary of State's own website? To me, the information should be going exclusively to the Secretary of State's website and then to the rest of the world. This doesn't happen. And oh, by the way, somebody else noticed that Yolanda Flowers, who was running against Kay Ivey, at that same time there loses 388 votes. How does that happen? Is this an anomaly? Don't know. Anyway, Secretary of State is the last to get the results, and it looks like there's voter manipulation here. I'll give you another example. November 2020 general election when Trump was running against Joe Biden. We can thank George for taking these pictures and sending this to us. If you look at Trump, he loses 20,000 votes in 33 seconds. You notice the timestamp here at 11:08:28 and down here 11:09:31. 11:09:01. That's 33 seconds later. He goes from 1,690,000 to 1,670,000. Oh, by the way, Joe Biden picks up 20,000 votes instantaneously. Now, the general public doesn't look at these numbers. They're only looking at the percentages. They would never see that flip in 1 second. And this just is one example that happens many times in many states throughout the election night. So you got to ask yourself, Bob, how is it done? Well, in 2001, this gentleman named Clint Curtis was a Republican former computer programmer. He was asked and paid by Tom Feeney, the Florida Republican Speaker of the House, to write an algorithm to do vote count manipulation. He did so. It took him about 60 lines of code in a very short period of time. They used it, tested it, and it worked. This information in this simple program spread like wildfire, and it was picked up by the CIA and other countries. Shortly after that, you'll notice, if you're up on current events, that there were elections throughout the whole world that were basically upsets. There's good suspicion that the CIA was manipulating that particular country's voting machines. Interesting enough, shortly after 2016 election, Italy, Germany, Netherlands all dumped the voting machines. And in my opinion, we haven't had a fair and honest election since 2008. And also, this is not a Democrat or a Republican issue. It is an us versus them issue. We have to save our country. The elections are rigged and selected. Remember those two words, rigged and selected. Now, this one is a simplified version of the one you saw from Madison County in the process flow diagram. And I've superimposed little icons there of hackers. You can see them. They're scattered behind all of the different icons that were represented in the Madison County process flow diagram. And you think to yourself, okay, how do these guys get involved and get hacked inside the system? Well, all of them are connected to the internet. They all can be sourced through Wi-Fi and internet. Specifically, George already talked about the illegal nursing homes and the voter roll drives and the inflated voter rolls. Thumb drives and the internet are very easily hackable. ES&S proprietary code manipulation, we don't know what's in the code, so we don't know if it's manipulated or not. There's a thing called fractional voting. If you don't know what fractional voting is, let's say I go and vote for Donald Trump. My vote should count one vote for Donald Trump, but the software can manipulate my vote and give Donald Trump 20% and give 80% of my vote to Joe Biden. This happens over and over again, and that's how they harvest votes for the opposite party. There's one more thing, a couple more things, sorry. We've already talked about Seidel and Edison, and with Seidel having servers throughout the whole world. And one more thing I just discovered recently, these Dell computers have what's called an iDRAC CPU. iDRAC stands for Integrated Dell Remote Access Controller. Computers in the old days used to have one CPU on the motherboard. And when you shut down your computer, everything shuts down, including the CPU. With these new computers, they have the iDRAC computer. When you shut down your computer, the iDRAC never goes to sleep. It is always up and running. That's how they can access your computer. Even though it's shut down at night, you can access your computer through the internet. They can turn it on, they can manipulate your software, they can download information, or they can put spyware, all kinds of data on your computer without you knowing it. And this happens all the time. If you notice, there's only one item here that cannot be hacked, and that is in the upper right-hand corner, which is the paper ballots, the only unhackable item. We had the opportunity at open house for the Madison County election. Right before that happened, Clay Parikh and I went to the warehouse, and Judge Barger let us in along with some other folks to look at their machines, see how they work, and watch the demonstration. While we were there, it was interesting that Clay noticed that in the corner there were several routers. Unusual, I thought, for a warehouse. Why would there be there? And then also, we looked around the room and there were at least 2 repeaters. Now, if the machines aren't connected to the internet, why would they have routers and repeaters in the warehouse there? They do have to program the machines before they get sent out, but it would be a heck of a lot easier to open them up and turn it on and connect to the internet and do the downloads automatically rather than doing it hand by hand and machine by machine with each person. Now, the interesting thing that came out, a piece of news information that came from Gateway Pundit, is like in August of this year, they came out with an article that some engineers discovered was called FirstNet. It was first created in 2012, and the purpose was to serve police, fire, and EMT services. In case there's an emergency, a 9/11 accident, whatever happens, the government can come in and control the internet, shut down the normal people so that the essential services would have priority and the bandwidth to communicate. Later on, they added energy, water, and transportation. Along comes President Obama, and before he left the White House, he adds, guess what? All the voting machines. So from this point on, the government can control down to the poll pads and the tabulators of anything that they want to do and control from one central location. So here's a summary of how it's done. Before the election, and let's say it's a presidential election, they decide the outcome for each state down to the county level. They ensure that they have enough voter line of credit. Then they program the machines. During the election, the databases and machines are continually monitored, they're hacked and tracked to manipulate the vote to make sure that they get the percentages they want, and they regulate the county outcomes. After the election, they clean up and lock up the evidence. The paper ballots are locked up, the thumb drives are erased, and the tabulators get shut down and put away, and nobody can touch them. So let's talk about, moving on, let's talk about the election and the machine costs. The interesting thing in the state of Alabama, when you go to the fiscal year report, the budget report, you will not find anything in there. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. I'll talk about it now. The word search in Alabama finds that there are, if you get this out and you do a word search and you look for ES&S, electronic systems and software, tabulators, voting machines, there's nothing in that document that talks about that. There is one line item that you talk about is called election expenses, and you average them up for various different years, general election, primaries, etc., off-year elections. They average between $30 and $37 million for a 4-year cycle for elections. This is the amount of money that's paid from the state. We don't know where it's go because it's not itemized. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Now, it's my guess, and it's unconfirmed, that most of this money is for county reimbursements. And hang on, I'm going to tell you some more about that information. The counties pay for all of the election costs, the machines, the storage, paper ballots. They pay for the programming from ES&S. They pay for the maintenance, and there are other associated costs. They get reimbursed by the state for various types of election, and listed here are the 6 examples. A county election gets no reimbursement from the state. A special election gets no reimbursement. A general election, the state pays the counties 50%. Primary elections, 50%. State and federal. State and federal would be like a House of Representatives, a Senate race, etc. If it's a constitutional amendment, which are very few, they get reimbursed 100% by the state. If you look at the numbers, the counties carry the burden of the election costs. The states do not. And you're going to see some more information here. Recently, I was able to talk to a person at the probate office in Limestone County, and she shared this following information with me. They have 75,000 voters in Limestone County. There are 25 precincts. They have 40 ES&S tabulator machines. The information they gave me was approximate. This is not exact, they were approximate, but an annual general costs are $165,000. A general election, when they hold it, is $350,000. A primary election, when they have it, is $600,000. Primary election, they have more ballots on there, there's more programming, larger paper ballots, up to 90 different selections on the ballot. Total election cost for a cycle for general and primary is $1,115,000. Again, this is not exact, this is approximate. How much do the machines cost? Well, I'm going to work ahead here and show you what I've done by analyzing a bunch of other counties, but I came up with this number. For the tabulators, they cost about $10,000. A general election, $154,000. Primary election, $301,000. Each cycle, there's $465,000 that goes to, of tax dollars, goes to ES&S to run an election in Limestone County. That's almost half of the total election cost. Here's another data point. I live in Madison City, and we had a city election. It was city manager versus a mayor city council form of government. It was a special election that was held on May 9th. We have 42,000 registered voters, and we were provided by Judge Barger in Madison County 18 tabulators for the various precincts. ES&S tabulators hand counted the ballots, and they spit out the tape, and they hand counted the tape from the tabulators. They did not hand count the ballots. They relied on the machine. The cost estimate, I was told personally by Judge Barger that the estimate for this was between $70,000 and $100,000. One other data point that I used in my calculations. Here is a spreadsheet that I gathered information from Limestone County, Madison County, and Osage County in Missouri. I got their database and their costs from their county. Did my calculations, and if you see here, the tabulator cost for a general election is approximately $3,860. For a primary election, $7,500. Again, if you look at this, this is $11,400 for a tabulator in 2 elections, primary and general. Now let's look at those numbers and expand that to the whole state of Alabama. Now, if you roll them all up into one and you look at the cost at the state level, we have 3,750,000 registered voters. Now, being an engineer, I can't help myself but doing some math on this, and you take $1.12 million from Limestone County and you multiply it times 67 counties in the state of Alabama. And I threw in a factor there of, let's make it 65%, because some counties have more, some counties have less. Limestone is pretty much in the middle. When you do the math, the cost comes up to $48,500,000 for an election. Now that's a low conservative estimate. Let's say it's even more conservative. Let's just call it $43 million statewide. How much do the machines cost? $18,500,000. Every year, the machines cost Alabama taxpayers $37 million. That money goes to ES&S. And we don't know what's inside the machines, and we're not allowed to see it. But we have to be trusted. All right, so I don't want to sit here and complain and give you all this bad stuff, but here is a solution that we can save our country and get rid of these machines. Hand-counted paper ballots. When you look at machines and paper ballots, let's look at some countries across the world. Who uses machines? The US, Australia, India, Brazil, Venezuela, United Arab Emirates, and the Dominican Republic. Look at the company that the US is keeping here with other countries. Which countries use paper ballots? Canada, Germany, Spain, Finland, Ireland, Sweden, France, Germany, UK, Netherlands, and Norway. And I'm going to talk about more of these other countries here in a second. What do they know that the U.S. is not looking at and ignoring? Now, when you mention hand count paper ballots, everybody throws up their arms and say, oh my God, we're going back to the Stone Age and it's going to cost us so much money. We'll never get the results. It'll take so long. That's road apples. Here is a country called France, and they have 48 million registered voters. Germany has 60 million registered voters. Netherlands has 13.2. Alabama has only 3.7. That's less than 10% of what France does. But yet the French, Germans, and the Dutch, within 1 to 2 hours of the polls closing, they get their results. Unbelievable, but people say that it's going to take too long. Let's look at France just for a minute. Here's the French voting process. As I mentioned before, 48 million voters. There is in-person voting only. No paper ballots, no mail-ins. It's day only. All of the ballots are hand counted and are counted by volunteers, so there's no cost to the state. State-run software is used to report the results. Now, after they do the hand counting of paper ballots, they tabulate and add up the results, and then they electronically file this with Paris. So it is an electronic reporting system to Paris for that particular precinct and all others. If there is a challenge, they don't look at the electronic version. They go back down to the hand-counted paper ballots and recount again for verification. Winning results are known in less than 2 hours after the poll closing. There is no way that we can do this. 48 million for France, 3.7 million for Alabama. To me, this is a no-brainer. I want to talk a little bit about fighting back, because this is something that has to come from the grassroots organization. It's we the people that have to start making a difference here and start pushing back on our government officials. One example is the organization I belong to, Focus on America. Last year, August of 22, we sued the Secretary of State. We had a hearing in front of Judge Griffin in the Alabama, can't remember, not the Supreme Court, but the Superior Court. And he ruled that we had no standing. We had no business suing the Secretary of State to get rid of the voting machines. We appealed to this Alabama Supreme Court at a very hefty cost. They agree with the lower court ruling. In my opinion, if we, the voters, don't have any standing against the Secretary of State and the voting machines and possible cheating, who does have standing? If you want some more information, there's a good article in 1819 News. There's a link in there. It talks about the lawsuit. It talks about Clay Parikh and machine vulnerabilities and some specifics that I've already mentioned. Let's talk about people. There was an organization fought back. Now here's a person who is a homegrown Alabama boy here that happened to be a expert in computer hacking. You would call him a white hat hacker. And Clay had enough one time. He just stood up and said, I've had enough, made some phone calls, got connected with the right people. He became an expert that testified in our court hearing. Those lawyers spread his name, and he testified shortly after that in the Maricopa County case, Kerry Lake versus Hobbs. And he went on to several other states testifying in court as to the hackability of the machines. Clay, within his background experience, when he was an independent verification person testing voting machines, he was able to hack into 100 different machines within 2 to 10 minutes. Now, he's not the smartest guy in the world, but if he can do it, how easy it is for somebody else, or like a nefarious country from somewhere else hacking into our system. This is an example of an ordinary citizen now turned fighter and a national patriot. He went from just a guy working in the local area here for an aerospace company, and now he's nationally known. Anybody can be doing this. So let's talk about some positive stuff, since most of the information I've given you was pretty negative. Here's an example. We're in Shasta County, it's Northern California. 180,000 citizens. Their board of supervisors voted 3-2 to get rid of their voting machines. So that county now does hand count paper ballots. Another example, and one of my heroes, is Linda Rance. She lives in Osage County, Missouri. In her county, there are 13,274 citizens. She did some research, got excited, put together a pitch, and went and talked to her county clerk, and then they switched from the machines to hand count paper ballots. Her example was so successful that she wrote a book called Return to Hand Counting. It's about this thick. It's free to the public. You can go online at Cause of America and download this information. It's A to Z about all the background of hand counting paper ballots. It tells you how to do it. It tells you how much cost it's going to be. The whole shebang from start to finish. Great handbook. Specifically with regarding to the law, I was able to do some research, in Alabama Code 17721A states that, and I'll read it to you, the governing body of any county or municipality or other political subdivision of the state, by adoption of an appropriate solution, and the key word is may, authorize, adapt, or direct use of electronic machines. Now, that word may is not shall or must. In contract language says that you can use this as an option. You can do anything else you want if the county commissioners decide it's to be. So we need to push back on the county commissioners and get a decision made in your county. So what can you do? As a person in the audience or watching this YouTube video, what can you do to help things out? One, you can get the Frank Speech app because Mike Lindell has a plethora of information. He had 2 summits, both in that should be 22 and 23, not 24. And there are a bunch of, there's a whole bunch of information. It's searchable, it's on video. You can do, there's about 10, 20, 30, 40, there's about 40 hours of testimony by various experts throughout the country, including Clay Parikh and other people that I've mentioned in this video. You can join Cause of America, and that's the website. Download and read the Return to Hand Counting book that I mentioned. More importantly, I want you to ask questions, demand answers, and do a follow-up. It's not just going in and ask a question, you have to keep on pushing. Another thing you can do is stop watching mainstream media. Turn off Fox News, ABC, MSNBC, NPR, CNN, and CBS. Very bad. You can, instead of just turning things off, watch RSBN, Dan Bongino on the web, Truth Social, Rumble, Megyn Kelly, Solari Report, Gateway Pundit, Tucker Carlson, Brian Lupo. Those are only a few examples of some true, honest-to-God, no BS reporting to find out what's really going on in the country. Join like-minded groups. Focus on America here in northern Alabama. There is another one in southern Alabama Liberty Group. You can join them. John Birch Society is a rapidly growing organization that you can join. They are all over the United States, and there are many others. Most importantly, put pressure on your county commissioners. Get to know them, find out their name, go visit them, write letters, put pressure on there, and force them to go to hand-counted paper ballots in your county. Force machine eradication. Now here's some other sources. If you're interested, these are movies and videos you can watch. The 4 I put down here, and there are many others, but the 4 I put down that I recommend is Atticus versus the Architect, documentary about Don Siegelman here in Alabama and how he lost the election at the hands of George Bush and Karl Rove and Eric Holder. You watch this video, your jaw will drop. It is mind-blowing. Selection Code is another one. It's a Tina Pita story from Mesa County, Colorado, that uncovers the secret critical to survival of America. You'll never again let a machine near your vote. 2000 Mules, that's been out for a while. Dinesh D'Souza had that out. It's a great story about Greg Phillips and Catherine Engelbrecht that talked about how ballots are stuffed, especially in our neighboring state, Georgia. Red, White, and Blue Blueprint is a docuseries that talks about how the Shasta County folks went from machines to paper ballots. I'm going to close with the next couple slides, and I wanted to, again, being an engineer, paint a big picture on a simple slide. And when you look at the reality of how our government works, is that we, the people, through our vote, control the executive and the legislative branches of government. Very important. And indirectly, they control, through our vote, the armed forces, our tax rates, the borders, which is in the news lately. They also control the government spending. They also control the judicial branch of our government, and they create the laws of our land. Now, unfortunately, there is another group that is somewhat nefarious, to say the least. There are lobbyists, the industrial military complex, and there are more recently foreign countries. If you pay attention to the news, you know what I'm talking about. They funnel millions, if not billions of dollars to our executive and legislative branches of the government. Now, if you take away our vote, they are the only ones that control what gets done in our country. Don't let them take away our vote because we lose control. Don't let this happen. A couple thoughts I'm going to leave you with in closing. We have an election coming up in 2024. It's my opinion that you cannot rely on a white knight like Donald Trump or Robert Kennedy or whoever you think you should win. They cannot change this huge tidal wave that's about to overtake our country. Whether you realize it or not, we're in a do or die battle. And it's going to cost us our liberty and the future of our country, the future of our children and our grandchildren. The question is, who are you going to look to solve this problem? If you're in a crowd right now watching this, look to the person on your left, look to the person on your right, and then most importantly, go home and look at your mirror. Those are the faces that are going to make the difference. This has to happen. Joseph Stalin said, "Those who vote decide nothing. Those who count the vote decides everything." This is happening today in our country. Don't let it happen. Thank you very much for watching. On behalf of George and myself, it's been a pleasure. Good evening.